Photography is both science and art. The word is derived from the Greek roots meaning to write with light. Photography isn't just a mechanical process, but it's an artistic one.
Photographers use their artistic views with their camera to capture natural images that can be alternated with how film is developed, digitally processed, or with today's modern technology of image alteration. While cameras have been around for less than 200 years, being birthed in 1839, the artistic aspect has only been around since the turn of the early 20th century, but wasn't fully accepted as an art form until the 1960s.
Toward the end of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century, photographers began to be aware of the potential of their medium as an art form.
Two of the most influential early photographers that helped pave the way for this art were Edward Steichen and Alfred Stieglitz.
Edward Steichen was a pictorialist. He started as a trained painter and drawer, and he was the editor for Camera Work magazine, which was the first photographic publication.
He helped founded the photo secession movement with Alfred Stieglitz. Together they opened the first photographic art gallery, Gallery 291 in New York. He is also considered the first fashion photographer and later went on to work for Vogue and Vanity Fair.
Then in his later life, he was director of photography at New York's Museum of Modern Art, also known as MoMA, where he curated and assembled the exhibit The Family Man, which he included works from over 273 photographers.
Those photographers include Ansel Adams, Versailles, Robert Capa, Dorothea Lange, Robert Frank, Lee Miller, Lizette Modell, and Alfred Stieglitz, just to name a few of many.
Alfred Stieglitz was also known as the grandfather of art photography. He was good friends with Steichen, and he helped form the collective, the Photo Secessionist movement.
He believed photography equaled art. He was one of the main advocates as pushing photography as a medium, first to put photographs alongside the likes of contemporary artists like Monet, Matisse, Rodin, Cezanne, and Picasso.
Pictorialism in the late 1800s was the first movement that showed the possibility of photography as an art movement, although it wasn't fully accepted without debate.
While snap shooters were taking numerous photos with the first handheld Kodak cameras, pictorialists rejected the point-and-shoot approach and relied on labor-intensive processes that showed photography was more than just pointing and shooting.
They would produce and create their own prints using various emulsions and pigments on different types of textured papers.
Because photographers did this by hand, they were emphasized and labeled as craftsmen.
Alfred Stieglitz was a leader in the pictorialism movement, along with Gertrude Casebeer, Alvin Langdon Coburn, and Frank Eugene.
Stieglitz's most famous series, Equivalents, consisted of clouds of different patterns.
Beginning in 1929, Equivalents was one of the first photographic series based on metaphors and symbolism.
The purpose of the series was to give the idea of connections and feelings between the viewer and the photograph they were viewing.
As Stieglitz and his followers continued to spread their photographs, they formed the Photo Secession movement.
The Photo Secession was also led by Alfred Stieglitz. The objective he wanted of the Photo Secession was
to advance photography as applied to the pictorial repression, to draw together those Americans practicing or otherwise interested in the art, and to hold from time to time at varying places exhibitions not necessarily limited to the productions of the Photo Secession or to American work.
In 1910, the movement fully supported the concept of photography as an art form by sponsoring a massive international show at the Albright Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York, presenting more than 500 photographs taken by its members and other photographers whose goals were similar to the movement.
In that same year, however, members of the photo secession movement went their separate ways due to the major members finding that image manipulation destroyed natural aspects of the photographs, aspects such as tone and texture.
Straight photography, also known as pure photography, is the counterproductive style of pictorialism.
Its concept is to show appreciation of natural, unaltered photographs so that the viewers can see the realism of what scene or event is taking place within the photograph.
Straight photography was influenced by documentary photographers, or photojournalists, such as FSA photographers during the Great Depression.
Some characteristics of straight photography consisted of high contrast, sharp focus, no cropping, and an underlying geometric structure.
One of the earliest pure photographers of the 20th century was Laszlo Moholy-Nagy.
His photos consisted of many unique perspectives, his use of positive and negatives, and dark shadows.
With this form, straight photography is a huge influence on many genres of photography, such as street photography and landscape photography. Dada and Surrealism are art movements that photography heavily influenced, but was not limited to just photography.
This really was where photography and art affected each other. Definitely what was happening in the art world at the time was affecting photography and vice versa. As it does now, what's happening in the world affects photography, what was happening in photography affects society and how we see the world.
So during this time, as we learned before, these movements were the response and reaction to World War I, leading into World War II.
Other movements of the time included avant-garde style, cubism, which had multiple new points of view,
Expressionism, which showed intense emotion, distorted reality, and challenging traditions, and Futurism, which focused on speed, technology, and on the pace of life.
People, artists, and photographers wanted to help elevate photography as an art. The camera was beginning to be a symbol of progress and industrialization.
The Dada movement was from 1916 to 1924, and it heavily relied on photography. This is where the first collages were seen, which involved pasting or cutting pieces of objects together, or photo montages, which uses real photographs from the media.
Artists used their ideas to come up with these crazy, never-before-seen pieces, juxtaposing people with objects and cutouts. You could only imagine the creative process.
Also during this time, the incarnation of Surrealism was born, which focused on the imagination of the subconscious mind. It was influenced by the recent teachings and dream studies of Sigmund Freud and political ideas of Karl Marx.
This is also where we see a lot of photographers' interpretations and experimental process, which leads to some of the effects and filters we see today, which is always evolving with the technology.
Artist and photographer Man Ray, who was a true surrealist, viewed photography as an extension of all of his work. He experimented with solarization, which is applying light to a negative of the image in the darkroom, distortion of the human body with lenses or mirrors.
Playing with the photogram, which is a cameraless image, when you use photographic paper and place objects on it and apply light.
Surrealism heavily relied on reality, but some photographs ranged to pure fantasy.
These pictures are always a favorite of mine as they bring interpretive powers to us, the viewer, touch our imaginations, and really provoke thought and discussion.
Salvador Dali and other famous artists of the time dabbled with photography and painting, and were the precursors to today's modern photo manipulation techniques.
These photographers could make you think about what is beyond the world we live in, exploring our imagination.
Moving into another favorite, abstract photography is a reaction to World War II, the fear of communism, and the Cold War, which led artists and photographers to veer away from the world around them and begin to focus on other things.
Like in painting, abstract photography focuses on form and color, maybe close-ups, known as macro or micro, silhouetted shapes, or where maybe the subject matter is hidden, form and perspective, and light play or long exposures.
Like surrealism, abstract photography is great at removing the viewer from the world we live in. Photography is an inspiration to human life, and it is the pinnacle through the expressions of our emotions.
Imagine our world without photography. We utilize the art form in everyday life, taking self-portraits with our phones, documenting our experiences with friends and family, and it helps us to remember that moment in time.
Photography is more than the leader of modern visual art. It is life.